Thanks for joining us today. We've got a very good panel today to talk about active shooters, safety in universities, hospitals, corporate institutions, etc. So joining me, I'm going to do introductions. Joe, can you start?
Thanks, Patrick. My name is Joe Souza. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Serverly. In partnership with USTA, we're a solutions provider in the security industry for basically any type of industry that you're looking for. So retail, higher ed, government, you name the industry, we can help support that. I've been in the security career field for about 35 years. I started after a tour in the Air Force. I started my security career field working as a support contractor for the US Air Force, did that for about 10 years. Then I worked for 2 defense contractors doing all things physical security. Migrated to Iron Mountain Corporation, where I ran 700 facilities in North America, all things physical security, alarms, access control, intrusion detection systems, guard force management. And then I transitioned from New England, where I live, to Florida, and that's when I started my role in higher education, where I started a program for the University of Central Florida, post an active shooter situation, which I think I'll talk about a little bit later, and worked there for 4 years, building a foundation for physical security for the campus. Then I transitioned to the University of Florida, did the same thing for them for nearly 4 years, helping build upon a very rudimentary, although it was the oldest university in the state of Florida, they didn't have good technology in place, standardized policies, procedures, construction standards. So I did that, and then I joined Serverly.
Excellent. Thank you. Avi?
Hey, Patrick. Good to be here. My name is Avi Golan. I'm the CEO of USTA. We develop advanced AI technologies for the security industry, for building security and safety solutions. We've been in the industry for almost 10 years. We were working to perfect the algorithm capability, the software enablement, and then work with partners like these established guys with us in the past few years. Looking forward to talk more about this industry.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Wes?
Hey, Patrick. I'm Wes Drake with Omni Response. I'm the Chief Operating Officer there. We've been in the school safety and active shooter space for about 2.5 to 3 years at this point. Our core competency is our platform. So we have a platform, a command and control platform, enabling us to remotely command and control different assets. Based on an alerting criteria, we can trigger different capabilities to enhance the overall safety of that location without any human interface, creating efficiencies for any first responders or people who are reacting to that environment. So yeah, just as Avi spoke, we do this by leveraging a multitude of different partners in order to create a comprehensive security solution for that particular environment. So I appreciate you guys having me here.
Excellent. Happy to have you. And again, I'm Patrick Welsh. I'm the GM for USTA in the Americas. So the first question, Joe, you were hired into one of the universities in Florida after an active shooter situation. We've seen them at MIT, Michigan, different schools around the country. Dealing with it after it happens, it's too late. What kinds of challenges are universities facing to try to proactively do things before active shooter situations happen?
Sure. So in my particular situation, joining the University of Central Florida, in March of 2013, there was a student that had not continued classes from the previous semester, was in one of the dormitories from December until March, not in classes. So there's a gap in the system that they hadn't taken him out of housing. He wasn't actively enrolled in any classes. Typical, like we see with a lot of active shooters, their appearance becomes disheveled, they become withdrawn from their community, and there was a lot of concern. He lived in a quad dormitory unit, housing unit, and his roommates saw him becoming isolated. No reports were made of the change of behavior. He was a pen pal with someone in prison that was a mass murderer and was asking for tips and tricks on how to pull off a mass casualty incident. So the way that he went about that was he gathered different types of weapons, large caliber rifle with high capacity magazine, small firearms, and then Molotov cocktails to use as improvised explosive devices. So it was going to be a tiered response. Pulled the fire alarm, his roommates came out, he took his high caliber weapon, pointed at his roommate, pulled the trigger, and it jammed, fortunately for that situation. He panicked, went back into his room, took his own life. But it was after that happened, law enforcement shows up. They don't have common access control for the building. They don't have access to the cameras in the housing. They don't know how many shooters are potentially involved. All they have is one eyewitness account. So they're scrambling for hours after the incident to try to figure out what happened and how to properly respond. Hours later, they breach the room. They find that it was a sole assailant and he had taken his own life. So it turned out well for that particular situation, but it revealed a lot of gaps and shortcomings in technologies. Universities, hospitals, corporations usually have a campus environment with many buildings, many doors. So making sure that access control points are controlled so you can limit access, put cameras with good technology on those entrances is really important. Challenges in funding. We're always competing in the security space for funding with the other departments of an organization, regardless of what type of organization. And a lot of the technologies that are there are expensive, so they're hard to get budget for, employ, maintain. Other challenges that we see also are communication. So when an incident happens, what type of environment exists, what type of mass notification systems are there. Universities, college campuses do a pretty good job, whether it's K through 12 or higher ed, with doing the notifications. Corporations are getting there as well. But in a hospital environment where you have a lot of the general public that's in there, it might be more challenging. The staff may know what's going on, but all of your patients and visitors might not know what's going on in that situation. We've talked a lot in the security industry, and our nation has, about mental health. So in corporations, usually HR deals with mental health issues if they're aware of them. And when mass layoffs happen or individual layoffs for a corporation, termination for a cause, there's always a concern by HR staff who are closest to it that what is this person going to do? And then they alert security if there's a high level of concern for their own well-being and those of the corporation or entity they work for. And it becomes a concern at a certain level. Others get involved. Other than that, oftentimes it doesn't. So the way in which employees or people in an organization are treated is really important. So, treating them with dignity and respect, regardless of what the situation is really important as well. And then good training from HR. HR plays a vital role, and we talk about it's more than just providing the training and checking a box. It's about, going through and making sure people understand. Do tabletop exercises of the things that you employ for your policies and your training. Follow that up with maybe a full-scale exercise where you actually practice techniques to see how the response is, because you learn a lot more from actually walking through the steps. Even if it's in a controlled environment with a tabletop exercise, you learn what mistakes might be there or what hurdles you have to overcome. Technology might be part of that. Early detection we talked a little bit about, but college campuses are doing a really good job with behavioral threat assessment teams. So they have counselors that are very well trained that work with law enforcement or security personnel on campus, and they do a very good job of engaging students. I think as more active shooter incidents happen, the faculty is more willing to come forward to say, I have a student of concern, so I want you to be aware. I'm concerned for myself and my class with this person being in there. And then these behavioral teams then start a program where they engage the person. They find out if there's a root cause to that, what are the circumstances surrounding the concerns that have been addressed. And then they stay in touch with that person. So that person knows they're being monitored. They also know that there's resources available to the individual for help. And just the mere nature that they're treated with that dignity, respect, being checked in on in a proactive manner, I think has probably avoided a lot of incidents from happening where they otherwise might not have. Making sure that there are reporting systems in place. So whether it's on the technology side, having technology that can report through when something happens and having trained people on the other end to handle those technologies and be able to respond quickly to an incident is certainly a challenge, because if you don't practice how to pull up the cameras in a particular building, rewind the video in a timely manner, find the culprit or the multiple culprits that might be involved, all of those things can really slow you down in incident response and proper response to an incident. And then a lot of entities, organizations lack having advanced technologies. They're available. USTO has great facial recognition technology, but many organizations still struggle with the fundamentals of security. having access control in their doors with badge access or more enhanced biometrics or two-factor authentication, having good security cameras with good clarity that can detect inbound and outbound traffic at your entry points, having large gathering areas covered by surveillance. So on college campuses, you have open green spaces, which are harder to cover, but then you have large auditoriums and classrooms and football stadiums and arenas and other spaces where it's important to have tools there that can be used for situations such as active shooter. Something that I see all too often is a lack of background checks and monitoring. So whether it's your organization and your people, they usually do pre-hire checks and then that's it. So there's no ongoing background checks for individuals, and that can tell a lot as if your financial situation changes, if there's a domestic situation that could potentially spill over to the workplace, being aware of all the activities that are going on. And then if you work in an organization where you're bringing outside contractors in or a lot of visitors in, there's probably little to no way of doing background checks. So when you bring in that general population, that introduces a whole level of risk that makes it harder to plan for, prepare, and respond to active shooter when you don't even know what the populations you're dealing with. Coordinating with law enforcement is really important. We spoke on another panel about the situation where you have an active shooter or a situation happen and the first responders are showing up to your organization for the very first time and you haven't met them, you don't know what their response capabilities are, they're not familiar with your facilities to go through, and that's not the time to give them a map and say, here you go, we think he's on the 4th floor in this classroom building. So, invite them in, first responders of all types, fire, rescue personnel, and certainly law enforcement. So they're familiar with facilities, especially if they're highly controlled facilities like hazmat or labs or things where they might not normally have access to. They usually shut those down for cleaning periodically. That's a great time to bring those first responders in and bring them in. And then finally, risk assessments can be done. That's a very easy step to take in a proactive manner to go. And we did this at both universities I worked for. So we would go to different departments, colleges, and talk to the people that worked in a particular space. And where funding is usually short for the security or law enforcement on campus, oftentimes departments have budget. And when you make them aware that I don't have the budget as a security director for my university to help fix your needs, I'm trying to address larger problems at a university level, they might have department funds that could help offset the card reader on their door or a camera in their hallway outside of their office space. And you also train them on what techniques they could use within their spaces to protect for run, hide, fight, the common techniques that are still employed. They've been modified slightly, but making them aware of things that they can do in their own space. And certainly it's their own decision when that event happens, how they respond. But if you at least plant the seed and walk them through their space and give them thoughts and ideas, they're better prepared for that because you make it a little more real for them in that situation.
Great information. Thank you for that, Joe. Appreciate that. So Wes, one of the questions that was raised in the active shooter scenarios is the point about integration, right? So when you go back and you look, one of the things is that the doors didn't communicate between buildings or the integrations were lacking, right?
Yeah.
So the cameras, maybe didn't talk. The police showed up. They didn't have access to certain things. Can you talk a little bit about the years of experience that you guys have with integrations, what you see, kind of a sense for where most people are as far as integrating technologies to prepare themselves to proactively deal with active shooters?
Yeah, so I want to go back to where you were talking about rehearsals, right? So do you see during those rehearsals that the law enforcement are involved, or are the law enforcement not involved? And I'm going to tie this back in.
So in the college environment, they were, because both universities I worked at had police that were part of the university system. So they are an integral part of the training and the exercising of those. When we did risk assessments, we did it with law enforcement. So we went as a team together, both security and law enforcement, to make an evaluation and recommendations. And then we do the exercises, we do it jointly with them as well.
And was the faculty, staff, students, et cetera, involved in those as well? Or was that just security staff with the first responders?
Good question. In higher ed, it is mostly the staff and administration and faculty that are involved because they are usually the constant. Students are such a transitory group with roll over every 4 years.
Right.
And they are provided a baseline level of training as part of orientation. They go through the active shooter training, which both universities I work for started with a CAN product and then made their own specific to the university with their own people there. But it's more of just the staff and faculty, not so much the students on the exercise part.
Got it. Yeah, so I bring that up because I think those environments create a conducive environment to figure out some of the integration points, right? Whether you have students going out a control point and that control point does not unlock or it is locked, looking at the different things that you can integrate in general. So we can bring in the facial recognition, we can bring in drones to automatically trigger based on certain alerting capabilities. We can bring in automatic door locks. We can bring in live video of that space inside those classrooms, and a lot of the different teachers unions, et cetera, nowadays limits or omits video recording inside of classrooms unless there is an event that takes place, whether it's medical or active shooter type event. So that's part of the integration that we've looked at with. We can comply with the regulatory guidance with no filming inside the classrooms during class. However, anytime an alert is triggered, those integrated pieces can turn on. And that changes the classification of that environment. It's no longer a classroom environment. It is now a security threat environment. So we use those different integrations and rehearsals and things to identify these pain points in different areas where we can enhance the probability of eliminating the threat or keeping people safe. But a lot of those things bring that appetite to mind. For example, if all the kids leave and go outside of the classroom, what we quickly realize is we don't have any control now that we are outside that space. If we never do that rehearsal, we don't know that. Well, then we talk about integrations, and now once we are out there, how do we better control the crowd? How do we better control the population? How do we better control who's coming in and out of that environment? And how do we have visibility to that entire space? And I lean on rehearsals all the time just because I think that they're the number one missed. They're the number one thing that's looked over. But they're also the number one thing that brings out some of these pain points that you realize, hey, if we can integrate this as well, this will make that work, right? So whether that's triggering an IP camera, triggering a drone, a robot to look through things, triggering cameras, we can leverage technology to do all these things, removing that human factor to where we can keep control of that environment, whether they're inside the classroom or outside of that classroom, while maintaining live situational awareness of that individual that's trying to cause harm. I'm going to stand on rehearsals. You'll hear me say it a lot today because I think that's what enhances that security posture and overall environment. But it enables us as the technology behind it to learn and grow and understand how we can create those efficiencies, right? So, the big thing is response times and how long it takes to get there and where people are at and understanding that operating environment as they arrive. And that's that faculty and staff working with that law enforcement agency. But on top of that, as we start introducing these technologies, what you'll learn is if you're not doing that with that law enforcement staff, your staff is going to have a understanding of the operating environment and the capabilities that you have, but that police department with a memorandum of agreement with you may not, right? So that's other things that we have to think about when we're putting the security in, is when people do show up to respond to that particular event, are we given donor devices? Are we, how's that working? Is that looking like a hot swap of radios or phones or different types of access control, right? So that's where we've looked at leveraging different technology for that as well. So how do I put AI on this device with near field to get inside of doors and unlock doors if I'm a first responder? So the door is automatically locked. Now what? Well, anybody with that device can get in and out of that door leveraging NFC because they are in that environment. So, all those different integration pieces, whether it's wearables, whether it's phones, robotics, drones, all those things can be tied together in one platform that you can, simply learn in minutes. Quite frankly, it takes about 26 minutes to learn. And then you're rehearsing from that point on. Those crowd environments, some more integration pieces is, facial recognition. We have a drone up for eyes in the sky, seeing and controlling that environment. Well, let's run facial recognition off that drone while it's up, so we know where that shooter's at, to where that drone can lock onto that shooter and follow that shooter as it moves throughout that crowd. So, and this is evolving daily with the additional capabilities and hardware that you can tie to these solutions on the integration side.
Excellent.
Can I maybe impose another additional question on top of it for you guys, because I think that's very important. So Joe mentioned a lot of steps and processes that involved in order to create that secured environment. A lot of investment in these elements. Each one of them is a very complex ways to solve, right? And you were talking about how we're bringing these technologies to help us be there for the right moment. As we see Gen AI advance,
Mm-hmm.
and the capability of Gen AI and AI in general is about predictability.
Mm-hmm.
It's about understanding the environment without really following a very step-by-step process. It's really almost like inventing the process,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this security environment in schools with all the rules and regulations and everything become more and more complex and complicating that environment. Do you see the predictability of tools and technologies is actually going to help to reduce that dependencies on all of these rules and restrictions and regulations, which making the stuff more complex? So predictive analytics, understanding the situation beforehand, AI is generative in understanding the way people behave. Is this something that you see you use in your environment or you're thinking about using in your environment? Because Usto starting to build capabilities that also predictive to what's going to happen, right? So we started with face, we moved to body, actions, behavior, but you use all of that algorithm in order to predict what could happen. Mm-hmm. And you start before the class, you start at the parking lot, you start in campus, you start by understanding people behavior. You detect fighting, you predict something might happen, and then you can kick off processes that you actually built over time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would like to touch on that. So I see active shooter solutions in two parts, right? And I think it's important to mention that. So one part is prevention and monitoring, right? Awareness, understanding. That's one side, and that's great. You need that, right? 100% you need that. So everything you just spoke of, in my opinion, falls under that prevention and monitoring awareness kind of category, right? Well, there's another piece to that to create, and you'll hear me call it a comprehensive solution. Not one-sided, not just prevention and monitoring, not just awareness. Now, how are we actioning over here? What is the action? What is the result of gaining this information? So this information is not any use to anyone until I use it. And that's the important piece. How are we putting that into play? How are we leveraging that to create a quicker response time, to keep that person in the parking lot, as you mentioned, right? And that's where both of those sides have to be focused on, right? To where we can truly mitigate and keep that person in the outside of that environment, to where they never enter in the first place. So I think those things are critical in the comprehensive solution. One doesn't outweigh the other, in my opinion. You can't do one without the other, quite frankly, unless you're reacting at that point to something that's already what I like to call right of the bang, right? So we're trying to stay here left of the bang by and that's obviously the shots being fired is that piece, right? So prevention and monitoring, and then an actionable something there to act upon that information that you've gained. That's how we're going to create that comprehensive solution together and provide those enhancements to that operating environment.
So Wes, those are great points. And Avi, to take a different twist on your question, both universities I worked at, over 3,000 cameras, and growing based on new construction and more enhancements to the campus environment. So I think most organizations, hospitals, higher ed, have a good baseline, and maybe older technology, but we're realizing that's not necessarily a bad thing because the technology that is there is adequate usually for a lot of these AI tools that are existing. What I see those cameras and the video recordings of those cameras being used for is post-incident, right of bang, to do an investigation after the fact. And I think organizations are yearning for solutions to help them do exactly what you posed as a question, tools to help them identify a threat before it becomes an imminent threat and be preemptive in making sure that it's handled properly. Or at worst, as the event is happening, being able to respond to it in a much more efficient manner using technology. Because what we hear from law enforcement is they're going to roll every police squad car and every law enforcement officer is going to enter the building with neutralizing the threat as the priority. That's hard to do when you don't know where the threat is, what he or she looks like, what they're wearing. And these tools will help significantly do that. So now that I'm on the sales side of the organization, I do see organizations yearning for this technology and seeking us out in partnership with you to try to give them better solutions to overlay on their existing technology to make it more successful.
Yep. I think the biggest thing we see after an active shooter is two. One, it's known to law enforcement. And the second thing is there were signs, right? So there were behaviors, there were things that were happening, students fighting with teachers, these people were known. So I think the integration that might have to take place is in the mental health areas, between HR, notifying security with more context so they can do some more of that preventative stuff. So question, Avi, so in a crowded environment, how would this technology help? What kind of experience do you have in large crowds, stadiums, people flowing out of a building during an active shooter to make sure they're not there? How does your technology help?
Yeah, and so Joe and Wes described these very busy environments. And I think this is the real life situation. We're not talking about one-to-one identification. We're talking about many-to-many. We're talking about existing camera infrastructure, sometimes very old cameras, CCTV that are placed in a location that maybe the visibility is not that good. Crowded environment, talking about stadium, football game on a Sunday. Talking about people going out of a very crowded building in New York or around it, New York City. And we will try to eliminate all of this complex environment and allow the software to detect an individual in that crowded environment. So you see a video for a picture of many heads, hats, glasses, you're talking about drones, trying to detect from far away. That's what we were trying to build. We were building the technology for, in order to really identify that person in that crowded environment.
So we want to thank our viewers for spending time with us today. We're going to leave information so you can contact these gentlemen and learn more and maybe do a security assessment yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.